I am normal about Dragon Age, which is a normal thing for normal people to say about a video game RPG franchise. I've played and loved every entry that developer BioWare has put out, compiled a critical compilation on the popularly maligned Dragon Age 2, and run, present tense, a completely normal number of 3 concurrent tabletop campaigns using Green Ronin's Dragon Age system, with the longest having started nearly a decade ago. But to say that my expectations of Dragon Age the Veilguard, set to release almost 10 years after Inquisition, were high when heading into an on-site preview event earlier this month is technically inaccurate. Between Inquisition and Veilguard, BioWare ultimately produced Anthem and Mass Effect Andromeda, both of which failed to live up to the expectations, and various reports over the years, even taken with several grains of salt, have not reflected kindly on Veilguard's own production. And that's not even getting into my own more personal wounds and disappointments, though it does feel important to admit that I texted a group of 4 other people they let Mary Kirby go in August 2023. It would be more accurate to say that my expectations were tempered. What even is a Dragon Age in 2024? I thought to myself ahead of the event. I wondered whether BioWare finally managed to pull it together for the culmination of so many stories and years of work, or if it would fall apart like so many of the developers' other endeavors. I'd steeled myself, preparing for the possibility that the latest game in a franchise that actually meant something to me would miss the mark, while running the numbers on just how far off it might be. In the aftermath, however, and assuming the rest of the game is as good if not better than what I played, I've come to believe that yes, I can and will happily play the latest and greatest Dragon Age for another 10 years if necessary. The story, as much as I've seen, is just as epic and devastating, the companions are captivating, and it's mechanically much more expansive in some ways while tighter in others. In hindsight, I don't think I was exactly wrong to worry given, well, everything, but roughly 7 hours with Dragon Age the Veilguard, running from the very start of the game through various chunks of what the developers referred to as Act 1, has calmed whatever fears I had, and I suspect it will do the same for anyone else in a similar boat at full release. I'm getting ahead of myself, but then again, as I said, I'm normal about Dragon Age. But if you happen to not be quite as normal as myself, the good news is that you seemingly don't have to know as much about it as I do. While I can't pretend to fully understand what a total neophyte might think of Dragon Age the Veilguard, it does seem to be very deliberately designed in as friendly a way as it can be. You play as Rook, an entirely new character with a faction, race, and class determined during character creation, roughly a decade after the events of Dragon Age Inquisition. You've been brought in to help Varric, a dwarf rogue with a clever tongue and the source of your nickname, and stop Solus, an ancient elf mage, from bringing down the barrier between the world and the realm of dreams and magic. Why? Because it will basically mean chaos and destruction, though Solus seems to view this as acceptable collateral damage. A poorly healed bone must be broken to set it right. Would it be helpful to know more about all of this? Probably. Is it necessary? It really doesn't seem like it. Dragon Age the Veilguard constantly pairs Tolkien-style proper nouns like Evanuris with, as an example, further context that these are the ancient elven gods, at least early on. Knowing the history between Varric and Solus, what happened in the previous games, and generally anything about the franchise is going to add depth, but the fact that Veilguard seems largely set far to the north of anything previous, and long after the events of those games, helps immensely as it is essentially new to everyone, regardless of experience level. As revealed in previous footage by BioWare, stopping Solus goes all kinds of wrong, and suddenly it's up to you and a ragtag band of companions, sourced from various factions across Daedus, to stop 2 rampaging elven gods that were freed in the process and aren't exactly thrilled at the state of the world. But those companions also have their own unique viewpoints, agendas, abilities, and so on. If you're coming to Dragon Age fresh off of Baldur's Gate 3, this should feel relatively familiar. Harding, the Dwarven Inquisition scout and archer, is with you from the jump, and the prologue introduces the Tevinter mage Neve, who represents the Shadow Dragons faction. Directly following the events of the prologue, the party is dumped into Arlathan Forest and eventually recruits Elven Veil-Jumper and mage Bellara. Lucanus the Antivan Crow is rescued later, and while my time with the game didn't reach recruiting Mornwatch mage Emmerich, Grey Warden Davrin, or Lords of Fortune warrior Tash, it does seem like the first act gets to all of that swiftly. In later sections of my preview, which jumped ahead by an unclear amount of time, I was able to mix and match them all into my party with some small requirements based on the quest. Depending on exactly what you're doing, some party members are necessary, and given that Dragon Age the Veilguard has pared down to 2 companions as opposed to Inquisition's 3, it's important that you're deliberate with your choices for combat reasons if nothing else. Interestingly, companions also seem to have individual exploration abilities. Bellara, for example, can interact with magical artifacts while Lucanus can pull platforms from the Fade to allow for extra traversal options. The game actually gets around requiring certain party members to be present by letting Rook's dagger use these abilities as well when they're not present. My time during the preview was relatively linear, so these opportunities didn't present as often as I suspect they will in the full game, but I'm guessing it will allow for some fun little secrets and extras more than necessities. Dragon Age the Veilguard's combat is overall a natural evolution from the past 3 mainline titles, but it still might surprise some folks to see just how much of an action RPG the franchise has become. Yes, there are skills to buy, and customization is as important as ever, but when you're in the thick of battle, it's about dodging and positioning yourself just right, and using abilities in combination with your companions to maximum effect. Even with the overall slide into territory typically reserved for the likes of God of War, Dragon Age the Veilguard comes packed with reasons to take advantage of these systems. While I had the opportunity to play as a mage, rogue, and warrior, it was the warrior that ended up being my favourite for an extremely simple reason: the ability to kick the hell out of enemies and send them flying off ledges. The amount of time I spent lining up that skill alone is, well, let's just say significant. Another standout quality of life feature in combat is the game's system of flagging which skills might combine with whatever else is going on across the battlefield. A skill wheel that can be toggled in the middle of combat brings up several assigned skills that you or your companions can use. A pretty standard way of going about this in modern RPGs. But if any of those skills can cause a reaction combo with whatever other status has currently been applied, that skill's image will be embellished as if to say, hey, this one will do more than usual. With how fast the game's combat can move, it's an incredible welcome reprieve of juggling informed decisions. One added benefit, or detriment depending on your outlook, to this mechanical change is the simple fact that Dragon Age the Veilguard just feels harder than previous Dragon Age games. While my experience during the preview event wasn't quite the same as spending several hours building up a single character over time and really getting granular about skills and upgrades, and therefore isn't necessarily indicative of what playing the game naturally might be, more than once I found myself seriously struggling on the suggested difficulty level, and teetering on the edge of several deaths in a row, and some of my compatriots weren't so lucky. I watched a number of them die during a particularly challenging mission that I won't spoil here, and I can easily imagine throwing controllers during that sequence on Halloween. By the time I'd gotten to what seemed to be the final battle before the next act at the besieged Grey Warden stronghold of Weishaupt, after several hours and what was clearly many more that were omitted, I was sprinting to the end. Not because I could cover it, as the initial embargo seemed to preclude me from doing so, but because if I did not reach the end, a world would exist where many of my peers knew what happened next, and I did not, for nearly 2 months. That was, in a word, unacceptable. Ultimately, I finished with 2 minutes to spare and a sigh of relief, and slowly calming heart rate due to the immense spike during the last battle. I don't know what all of that says about me as a person, but I do think it speaks to the strength of what BioWare has on its hands. Dragon Age the Veilguard releases October 31st, 2024 for PC, PS5, and Xbox Series XS. Will you be playing this one? What do you most want to see from it? Let us know in the comments, and stick with GamesRadar for the latest news, previews, and more.